So welcome everybody to the Legal Navigator Webinar. I'm your host Rebecca from Law Training Centre. I hope you all had a great start to the year and thank you so much for joining tonight's session, which will be focusing on QWE, your questions answered. Today we are joined by three amazing guest speakers. I'm going to pass you over to them so that they can give a very brief introduction. So I'm going to pick on one of you. We'll start with Charlie. Do you want to go first?
Of course. I'm Charlie Tye. I recently had, I think, roughly 20 to 22 months signed off of QWE. I'm currently a PhD candidate and I teach, I think, as an associate lecturer at York Law School.
Brilliant. Dalia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dalia Sarhan, and I am a product lawyer at the International Commercial Launch Strategy team at Novartis. I am based in Basel, Switzerland, and I'm currently studying for the SQE1.
Shahedur.
It's me. Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Shahedur Rohman. I'm a practicing solicitor operating within the jurisdiction of England and Wales. I'm a law tutor at LTC, but I'm also on the ACL clinic where I, as a solicitor, have the fantastic job of helping to sign off QWE for those looking to qualify as a solicitor.
Brilliant. Thank you all. So just a very brief introduction for those who are new here, not familiar with Law Training Centre. So we are based in the United Kingdom. We are specialists and accredited providers to deliver legal professional courses. We offer various pathways into the legal profession, with all our courses being online and on demand and flexible, where people can start at any time. And we have experienced tutors and practitioners within the legal fields who will be able to help students with their education. Now, for those who are joining us today, this particular session will be focusing on the qualifying work experience for those on the solicitor's qualification examination route. So it's for those learners who are currently on the SQE pathway or looking to pursue the SQE route to become a solicitor in England and Wales. So an overview of this route for anyone who's prospectively looking to join it. So the requirements for candidates to become a solicitor is to have achieved either an LLB or a degree in any subject or equivalent level 6 qualification, pass the SQE1 and SQE2, complete 2 years of qualifying work experience, and of course pass the SRA's character and suitability requirements. But today's focus, like I mentioned, is on qualifying work experience. So the Solicitors Regulation Authority, they define qualifying work experience as any experience providing legal services that offers you the opportunity to develop some or all of the competencies needed to practice as a solicitor. So one thing that a lot of people have been asking questions about is just the elements of how to obtain qualifying work experience. So this is where we're just going to get further information from our guest speakers today, just to hear about their experiences and how they found acquiring a qualifying work experience and having the process signed off. So if we could start off with Charlie, it would be great if you could just share with our audience today just a bit about your journey, how you obtained your work experience and the process in getting it signed off.
Absolutely. So I suppose my journey is almost a bit retrospective in that when I started both of my placements, it may have actually been slightly before QWE was introduced, which may slightly show how old I was when I graduated, perhaps. And as part of, I think then it was looking for sort of career opportunities, I found a number of placements and a number of opportunities and slowly narrowed that down. And since then going through studies, going on to further studying, teaching, I acquired, I think, a number of potential QWE placements. And when I learned a bit more about the SQE route and realized that was something I wanted to pursue for my own professional ambitions, I began looking at whether or not those experience counted, and the two that were eventually signed off, to spare the details, was one with essentially a youth justice service, working with people going through, working with young people going through the police various procedures with the police. And the second was a paralegal position, which I'd done for, I think at that point, part-time a couple of years, and not, well, for actually a few more than that, and full-time. We translated that elsewhere. And then I was looking for QWE confirmation and found I was not the only person who was perhaps a bit overwhelmed and confused by this new system, and eventually found my way to the Access Law Clinic, who were essentially helped get me through that final hurdle of signing it off.
Brilliant. I think it's worth noting for everyone listening today that the 2 years of qualifying work experience can take place in a variety of organizations, so you're not restricted to just working within the traditional law firm environment. So Charlie, you mentioned that you did one in the justice service and then also a paralegal place. So for people who are looking to find different work experience, we do understand that it can be a bit challenging in today's legal climate where let's be honest, it's very competitive out there. So it's good to broaden your perspective and your potential in finding work placements. So amongst other places such as law firms, you can find work experience within voluntary environments, so whether that's citizens advice, pro bono law clinics like the Access Law Clinic that we've got running on, and various avenues as well. But what I was just going to touch on, Charlie, were there any specific challenges in actually applying for those qualifying work experience? So just how did you overcome them, if there were any?
So one you've already highlighted a little bit, and that is competition. In that the legal market, the actual division is probably, there's gaps definitely within it later on, but for especially early entry and people trying to get into the legal profession, it can be very difficult indeed to find those placements. And so a big challenge I had when I started, especially I think I was then as an undergraduate, was standing out from other candidates. And for that, I found fairly early on that the academic side, while important, is not the be-all and end-all. And I sort of had to invest quite heavily in new skills, take some opportunities I hadn't previously considered to stand out. And then you get through to interview and start showing that, yes, I'm somebody worth taking on. I know what I'm talking about. And perhaps more importantly, have practical experience in various environments to show to any placement, because especially legal ones, an academic background is good, but do you understand how the law actually works is a question that's often in the back of an interviewer's mind, or even when reading an application. So that was a definite challenge I had early on, and was something I had to build quite quickly to stand out in the market.
Yeah, that's really good. How do you touch on those points? Because we have had a few questions of people who have been in different industries for, let's say, the HR industry for about 25 years, and then are looking to get qualifying work experience within law. We do say that networking and just leveraging the sort of connections that you have in the industry is something that's important. So maybe not particularly for you, Charlie, or just anyone on the panel, if you can give any advice on how people can network and find different opportunities within the legal sector.
Well, I think, first of all, it's about putting together a list, your own list about areas of law, what interests you in terms of law. You might, as a starting point, look at what your own personal interests are. So if you're interested in sports, if you're an avid hockey player, football, parkour, whatever it is, then have a think. That's your sport. And then you say, okay, what are the interesting bits about your sport? If you were to work with people in that organization or in that field, what kind of legal issues will they have to deal with? Okay, and just do a bit of reading, and then you think, okay, and then you and then you might decide to work your way down. Okay, so maybe you look at a sports lawyer, regulatory lawyer, look at the organization. Do they have an in-house department? And then once you start to funnel through, then you can use the very wonderful facility of LinkedIn to look for people who practice in that area, to search for them, to connect with them directly and ask questions about that, and even asking if they'd be able to spare 5 minutes over a Zoom call or a Teams call just to quickly just to discuss how you would go about getting involved in that field, and what sort of steps they would take. And there really is such a wealth of information, and you know what, you would be surprised how many people will be willing to give you that time of day to help you get that foot in. Now, of course, sometimes not everybody is going to be able to respond. Not everyone's going to be able to give you that time day, but you've got to have that perseverance really as well. So that's kind of what I would suggest, is look forward to your interest, look what interests you, and then narrow that down completely, narrow that down through the business aspect, and use LinkedIn and see where that takes you, which I can assure you will take you very far.
Brilliant. So I kind of like how you touched on the point of finding your interest, because you know, the SRA has made it quite broad that you can acquire the legal services in any sort of organization, and it doesn't have to be within law. Let's say somebody wants to do, let's say, property, and they want to gather work experience within the property sector, but not necessarily within a law firm. I think you can obviously get the work experience there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be signed off by anyone in the organization. So Shahedur, if you could speak to the Access Law Clinic aspect and just elaborate how you can sign off, well, solicitors from any sort of law firm can sign off on work experience without that person having to be working within the law firm in itself. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope I can do your question justice. So first of all, what you'd have is, if in terms of the signing off process, it's very straightforward and very seamless. And the first thing for the candidates perspective, they just need to gather and recollect the experiences they have. And most people who've worked, whether it be a year, 2 years, doing legal related work, will be surprised how much they've actually gone through that process. And what you need to do is you need to have a very keen eye on terms of the competencies. So there's a statement of competence that the SRA website has in terms of what you need for that experience to count as qualifying work experience. So you need to have a look at that with a keen eye, and then kind of go through a process of your own soul searching, where you review what you've done and see actually how many of those boxes you can tick. And that's really important. I think as you know, when you progress even beyond a solicitor and onwards, you have to look at inwards in terms of your own skills. You're evaluating what you've done and looking at what you need to practice to develop it further. So you got to go through that process, okay? And of course, this is important because once you access the service of Access Law Clinic to then help sign off, there's a very, very easy and seamless form that you'd need to complete, which takes you through first of all the basics, like who you are, where you've worked, and how many areas of law you've done, and what your supervisors are and whatnot. And then, of course, you then go through the competencies, and hopefully once you've gone through that prior process of analyzing the competencies and what work you've done, you then need to transfer that onto that form, so that we can understand, those who are signing off on behalf of Access Law Clinic can understand what's required, what you've actually done, and get a real understanding of what you've done. And then, of course, that will then form the basis for that, for the signing off solicitor to then contact the supervisors to then verify the work that's been done, verify that you are competent, verify that you've signed off on those competence in terms of what you've done and the work and the responsibilities, and make sure that all checks in with the supervisor. And in terms of the workload, of course, bearing in mind legal aspects and some of the work that we do within the competence in the field of law can be so wide ranging. And it's amazing how people of different organizations, not just law firms, can actually touch upon a lot of these aspects and a lot of these competencies, whether it be the research, the legal drafting, the legal writing, preparing correspondence, providing advice, providing options, having to negotiate certain issues, whether it be in a transactional matter or in a potentially contentious situation. Of course, it's so wide-ranging, and I think what we've seen from law is the work that you do is so diverse and spans across so many different types of work, whether it be voluntary, whether it be working in-house, whether it be working for another organization, in a law firm, outside of a law firm, or even for a commercial organization that touches upon legal work. from a data protection aspect. There's so much, and we always get surprised with the diverse work that people are doing, and of course it's always a delight to be able to have to sign that off. I hope that answers your question, and perhaps many more.
You did. Brilliant, Shahedur. So what I was just going to touch on is just you do have a few people who are a bit concerned about when exactly to complete their QWE, whether that's before, during, or after. So you can complete your qualifying work experience either before, during, and after, but we have specifically received a question for someone who's a little bit concerned because they've done SQE1. Now they just want to do their qualifying work experience before they sit the second half of their exams. So they want to know roughly the time frame it will take to get their qualifying work experience signed off and confirmed. Could you give us rough guidance on how the process is and how long it normally takes to get it signed off on, Shahedur?
It doesn't take that long at all. I mean, assuming that you've accumulated that, let's say, that 2-year experience, that 2-year period, and that doesn't necessarily have to be from the same person. You may well be from different organizations or different supervisors, but once you've actually collated that and you're able to transfer that in the form that that the ALC require you to complete, the process does not take long. It all depends on how easily available the supervisor is. Your supervisor, that obviously needs to help verify that information. Also depends on how easier you make our job in terms of ensuring that what we need to know is there in the form and in the information. So it could literally take a couple of days. Really not that long, and I think it's just one of the benefits, because before you'd always have to go through this very tenuous and lengthy process, but actually under this new system it means that once you've got everything in in a row, it all lined up, it will not take you that long at all.
Brilliant, thanks, Shahedur. You touched on something earlier just about the competencies of what they need to measure up their work experience to see whether they meet the criteria from the SRA. And I was wondering if, Charlie, if you could just give us some real life examples of what you actually did, because obviously you've recently got it successfully confirmed. So if you could just tell us the specific tasks and jobs you did whilst you were working, just for those who are a little bit uncertain whether they're doing the right sort of work and whether they're getting the correct experience.
Absolutely. So I think flexibility was a takeaway from some of the previous answers, and I'll emphasize that again in that those competencies, the SRA lists them publicly, can be very flexible. And I found jobs which it's often overlapping. For instance, one of my placements involved researching, essentially finding the original contract, or lease I should say, and finding that, reading it, then doing research on various terms, and even generalist research, refreshing my memory after I had left law school at that point on some of the fundamentals, and essentially all of those, and then putting that together into one document. So that's one task, but that engages a variety of competencies. Your legal drafting, you're putting the research together and giving that to somebody, which also goes into various professional competencies in terms of how you structure that, how you're communicating legal concepts to an audience which may or may not know to the same level of detail of the law as you do. It's legal research. It's how are you doing that? How are you doing that effectively? How are you choosing the information which is effective? And then even further back than that, it's how are you agreeing the time frame in the work with the work that's going to be done? How are you agreeing who you can go to for support, your ethical frameworks, and all of those things come into it. And so one task can touch many of the competencies, and that's one example. And among the others I used was, for instance, essentially it was a dispute with, during an interview, someone asked a question I objected to. And that again is similar. It's how you're communicating and representing someone, how you're doing that effectively, how you're doing that civilly and professionally, which is a very vital part of it. How are you checking that you're doing the right thing? Who are you checking with? A big part of some of the competencies is how are you accessing support and how are you doing that effectively? And so I'd say it's less about, I suppose, the competencies themselves, if you do need to meet 2 for QWE, but the tasks that are generally given in legal work, and I use that as broadly as possible because QWE can be very broad, naturally tend to engage the competencies, and more so than I expected, definitely. I looked back at some of my tasks and was pleasantly surprised, and on reflection, more secure in that I had been meeting some of these competencies much earlier than perhaps I would have realized.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Charlie. So, Dalia, just to go to you for a second, you have a completely different journey to Charlie. It would be good to hear your experience from the international perspective, because you're currently studying the SQE and you're also a qualified lawyer. So, qualifying work experience is something that qualified lawyers are exempt from, but I'll let Dalia just elaborate on her journey and what the process will be like from people who are going from that route.
So thanks a lot. So a lot of international or foreign lawyers are currently looking into getting a qualification from the UK for career development reasons. And with the new system, it's where you are exempt from qualifying work experience. It's become even more attractive for lawyers who are working, because in the past where you had to do this, I mean, it would have been difficult to leave your current job and look up for something else. And I mean, there is an assumption that a lot of the competencies that the other members of the panel have been referring to are covered if you're already a qualified lawyer and have been working for a very long time. So in my case, I've been practicing for 15 years. There is an assumption that, you know, in the totality of what I've done, it would cover the competencies that you're looking for in QWE. So that's kind of where it's being, you know, the idea, I suppose, that it's that you're exempt from that. And there are currently, I've decided to the SQE routes. I'm studying for the SQE1. There are, however, depending on the jurisdiction that you are qualified in, options to get exemptions from taking parts of the SQE exams. In my case, I'm qualified in Egypt, so I would have to do the SQE1 anyways. There is a possibility for me to try to apply for an exemption from the SQE2. And that would be by also demonstrating certain competencies that would be covered by the SQE2, which has a process and similar to what was explained with regards to qualifying work experience. But yeah, so it's exciting. I'm currently working full-time while I study online through the Law Training Center, which is very interesting because it's been a while since I was in law school, so it's interesting to go back and start studying again. But it's quite interesting. It's doable, I think, and you know, this new system basically enables, I think, a lot more lawyers who are working outside of the UK to also further the career by obtaining a qualification.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dalia. I just wanted to add on to that in case people are not exactly a qualified lawyer, you can still do your qualifying work experience overseas. There's no requirement that it actually needs to be done in England. The only main requirement is that the experience will need to be signed off by either a solicitor of England and Wales or a compliance officer as well. So that is for anybody who is interested, who's joined us from overseas. You can still complete your work experience from a distance. No need to relocate just yet to the UK. So that is pretty awesome. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of questions that we received. So somebody wants to know if they have started a work experience for 6 months. I'm sure we've pretty much covered this question, but if they've started a work experience for 6 months and they took a break, can they resume their work experience? So Shahedur, have you received any sort of CVs of people who've started a 6-month work experience period and then took a break for studies and then continued again?
I haven't, no. Sorry, not a very lengthy answer, but no, I haven't really. What I've found is I've had those that done experience in one place and then followed up with another. I don't. If you're looking about a 6-month break between experiences, then I don't imagine that will actually be a barrier at all.
Yeah. So typically you just need all your experience to amount to up to 2 years. So if you are studying, let's say the break is due to studying or just other commitments in general, as long as you can accumulate the remaining 2 years experience, that should be perfectly fine. The route is flexible in that respect as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. So Alicia, did you want to open the chat for any further questions? While we're waiting, Shahedur, could you give any examples of not successful QWEs you've signed off so that people can avoid any sort of pitfalls?
In terms of unsuccessful applications, I don't have any direct example of unsuccessful applications, but things that kind of wouldn't quite hit the mark, where would be those where there isn't a proper clear explanation as to the legal work that was carried out, where it's unclear how that meets the competency in terms of the description of the task, where it's difficult to get hold of the supervisor, and there is a barrier, and it's difficult to understand with the supervisor exactly, whether how they supervised that person, because of course I've got to be satisfied that they did do that work. So those are the kind of situations where I'd imagine kind of it's not successful, or where it's well below the 2 years in terms of the experience gained.
Brilliant.
But what, if I can add to that, and this is just not the question you asked, but I think that this whole process with the SQE and getting signed up, it really is a game changer, I think. And listening to Dalia and to Charlie, I think this is a fantastic way of in being able to qualify in what was previously a very closed off and very restrictive profession, but actually it's opened the doors out to such diverse talent that means that that the profession can benefit from having such talented individuals getting involved, doing some fantastic work within the field of the legal profession and sharing that job title as being a solicitor. And you wouldn't get that. You didn't get that elsewhere. So this is a really great opportunity, especially for those who are international as well, abroad outside of England and Wales.
Great.
That that may not be in England, but of course looking at other areas of law, but wish to be known as a solicitor of England and Wales. So this is fantastic. This is a way of extending the prestigious title of solicitor and opening and just making sure that we are making the most out of those who have the aptitude for law.
Great, thanks, Shahedur. Speaking of international, as you just touched on it, we've received a question. They have more than 10 years of legal work experience internationally. They also have an international LLB. How can they acquire QWE?
So if they've already been working, I mean, if they are qualified in their jurisdiction, then they're exempt from this requirement. So that's, I suppose, what makes it easy. You don't even have to go through the process. But as you said, it's not even impossible to get that verified. And as I said, from my experience, if you look at the competencies, if you have been practicing for 10 years, you've probably covered it. You just need to kind of follow the process and answer the questions and go through the process. It's probably easier than you think. That's probably what I say. And again, if you're working anywhere where, like if I talk about myself, for example, if you're working anything that has to do with international trade in any way, contracts, even if you are working in a non-common law jurisdiction, English law is a preferred chosen law in so many contracts that you will have been exposed to a lot of things, and probably more than you think. So I think, again, the key question is, are you qualified? In which case you don't need it. And if you're not, you probably can get your experience verified.
Yeah. So overseas experience, like I've mentioned earlier, is counted towards your QWE, providing it meets the criteria of falling under the Legal Services Act 2007, Section 12. So if you're doing one of those legal activities, such as providing legal advice with the application of law, for example, or probate activities, for example, or any notary activities, it will count towards that. So it can be acquired retrospectively. It doesn't need to be done again if you've successfully signed it off. And like Shahedur has mentioned earlier, if you are struggling to get any sort of Solicitor of England and Wales, for example, to sign that off, you can use our QWE and confirm services at the Access Law Clinic, and they'll be able to sign that off for you. So Shahedur, I've got a question for you. Does it have to be within the last 5 years? How far back can it go?
I mean, it's the that's a really good question. And to be fair, I haven't come across many situations where it's where the experience has gone beyond the 5 years. I guess the issue is the issue is that if it goes well beyond 5 years, is that I'm going to have to myself or any of my colleagues will have to try and contact the supervisor or the person that worked with in order to verify the work that was done, and it becomes a lot more difficult to verify that when it goes a bit further back. I mean, I could struggle to tell you what I did what piece of work I did 5 years ago to this day. So I can imagine any colleague that's supervising perhaps may feel the same. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question, but I'm sure there is a more precise answer, which I'm probably using there, but I'm happy to go back to the questioner individually, if that's okay.
Great. So if you are currently practiced as an immigration law regulated by OISC, sorry, I can't speak this evening, the best route would be the SQE route, as we mentioned earlier. So that is the new standardized way to become a solicitor in England and Wales. If you've already got a law degree or an equivalent level 6 qualification, you'll just need to complete the SQE1 and SQE2 examinations along with 2 years of qualifying work experience, and then complete the Solicitors Regulation Authority's character and suitability requirement. Once you complete those requirements, you can then qualify as a solicitor. That will be the most streamlined route. Hopefully that answers your question, Dinesh. Based on the applications you've done so far, Shahedur, is there any specific guidance for how much time period of QWE that would be considered for part-time candidates? For example, if they're working part-time 20 hours a week, how much time period of QWE would generally be acceptable?
Interesting. That's an interesting question. I would say, I mean, the thing is that the guidance again doesn't go specific in terms of part-time. Although the way it's framed is around 2 years. So yeah, it may well be if you're getting that experience, and again I may be corrected, if you're getting that experience on a part-time basis, let's say you're working half, right, then you want to try and think about either doubling it up in terms of the proportion, because if you're working, let's say, out for 35 typical week, you're working half of that, then of course you're getting half of that typical experience. So you probably may well, so in terms of 2 years, rather than getting 2 years experience, you may have to double that up to 4 years in order to show that. That's kind of that's my initial view. I think that however, it can come down to, there may be individual cases that may warrant a different outlook and may a different level of consideration. And of course, we'd have to just liaise with the SRA or look at the further, finer print, smaller print, in order to ascertain that. But I'm sure some of the other panel members might be able to share their experience in terms of building that up and how they felt it worked for them if they went part-time.
Charlie, did you have any part-time sort of experience, and how many hours?
Yes, thank you for unmuting me. I didn't realise that would lock me out. No, so I think both of mine were part-time, done over. In fact, the person who asked earlier about a break in their work, I think had something similar in terms of I worked around term for a sizable portion of it. So essentially, what happened there was it was a case of looking at how much have I actually done, and essentially extrapolate that. If this was a full, like, how much of a percentage wise, if you look at the hours and days, depends on the nature of the work. And I had fairly reliable hours for one of mine, definitely. And so over the time, you sort of match that up to how much proportionally of a full-time position has been done, and that was on the access law. Sorry, on the yes, access law QWE. There's the form. There was a box to explain how those calculations were done and how that was come to. It was, I think, confirmed with the supervisors. So if it's a part-time position, essentially discuss with your supervisor and try and work out how much proportion of a full-time position has been done, and that can then part of the application part of the form, which can then be checked. So there is multiple stages of checking. So it should be something that will be looked at and can be done. Just make sure you're getting the right amount for what you've done.
Thank you all for your questions tonight. If you have any further inquiries or need any further assistance, please feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help you out. But thank you all for joining us tonight.